Episode 251. Kathy's Cultivation Technique. The weather was lovely. Kathy walked silently beside Jacob. "Your brother left for London yesterday?" Jacob asked.
"He could have left a couple of weeks ago, but he was worried about the game this year. However, he told me that he could go at ease after the last game,"
Kathy said. Since it was not a weekend, there weren't many students waiting at the bus stop at the gate.
Jacob?"
Kathy said lightly after hesitating on her seat beside Jacob for a few seconds. "Yes?" Jacob turned to her.
"I resigned from the class president position not only because I was tired. Also, I have more things to do,"
Kathy said. "More things?" Jacob looked at her, confused. Kathy nodded.
"Some things beyond my imagination."
"Did that woman say something to you?" Jacob asked timidly. Kathy shrugged at Jacob with her hands facing up. In the middle of her palms, where an acupoint was, a golden line was slowly moving.
"Are you hiding a lot of things from me?"
Kathy took her hand back and asked Jacob. Jacob stared at her in surprise. "How did you get this?"
"After you left her place that day, she taught me a spell, and I practiced for a day."
Kathy's voice was getting quieter, to a point she didn't even believe it. Jacob understood her feelings, since he felt as if he was crazy when he first entered Sophie's life. But Kathy achieved a gold godly note like this in a day. Maybe her gift was even stronger than Susan's.
"I asked you if you believe in cultivation because that was what she had asked me by writing on the paper,"
Kathy said. "Did you think that she was not sane at the moment?" Jacob asked. Kathy nodded.
"I thought she was not herself due to her age, but I found it abnormal when I got home. That was why I gave you a call."
She looked up at Jacob again.
"Does that mean you are cultivating as well?"
"My situation might be a bit different from yours." Jacob shook his head immediately. "It is hard to explain." Kathy looked utterly lost. These things were entirely beyond her comprehension. "What is yours called?" Jacob thought for a bit before he asked her.
5 elemental life-death note."
Kathy bit her lip as she looked up into the sky outside. She whipped out her palm. The entire movement seemed to be very exhausting. It was still quiet outside. The glow of the sun looked very beautiful. Jacob was just about to take his eyes back in relief when a loud noise came from the sky. The bus even shook 3 times as it drove forward. Kathy was shy.
"I had no idea it was this powerful."
She gritted her teeth.
"Does this bus go straight to your place?"
"We still have to..." Jacob found himself stuttering. "Pick up Sophie."
"Oh,"
Kathy said quietly. "Yeah," Jacob smiled with a shrug. The bus soon arrived at the gate of Sophie's school. The school day was over, so the gate was crowded with students. A Rolls-Royce was parked right in front of the school gate, forcing the students to walk around it. Henry stuck out in the crowd with his arrogant temperament.
"Hey, this is Henry. He's so charming. I heard that he already got many love letters and chocolates on the second day of transferring schools."
2 girls discussed in excitement as they walked past Jacob and Kathy. Kathy looked at them and smiled. Girls secretly gossiping about cute guys in their class or the classes near them was something that happened all the time in high school. Sophie walked out of the gate at this moment. Then all sorts of chatter continued.
"I heard that the handsome new student transferred here for Sophie. Word is that they are engaged." "Really? You didn't know? He even went to her class to see her, but Sophie kicked him out. Maybe they're having an argument. Anyways, I heard they are engaged. It can't be. Isn't Sophie in class 2? Aren't the students in class 2 kind of poor? Look at Henry. He rides a Rolls Royce. How can their families be a match? I'm not sure about that. Maybe their families have known each other for a long time, and maybe Henry is attracted by Sophie's charm. Henry's family is loaded, so it's a sure thing that Sophie's family would like to get connected with them.
Jacob was speechless at the students' random gossip. How could the South Atlantic be wealthier than the North Atlantic? Besides their local specialty, South Atlantic Mystic Ice, they couldn't compare with North Atlantic on other resources. Regarding wealth, the South Atlantic isn't even half as rich as the North Atlantic, he thought. Do you need a ride, Soph? Henry asked Sophie, who just walked out of the school gate right before he sat down into the Rolls Royce. Although he wasn't loud, everyone witnessed the invitation, since Sophie and Henry were both at the center of everyone's attention. Sophie had no interest in talking to him. She walked around the Rolls Royce to cross the street. Dracon and the elders usually wouldn't come to pick her up if it weren't a rainy day. She would take the bus home herself. Soph! Jacob waved toward the school gate from the other side of the street. Sophie smiled as soon as she heard Jacob's voice. She was glad that she could finally get rid of Henry. However, her face froze as soon as she saw Kathy standing beside Jacob.
Who's that guy? I don't know. He's been here a few times to pick Sophie up. No, he came into the school last time as well. They say that he's Sophie's boyfriend. Oh, I remember. It's getting interesting. Sophie found herself a boyfriend even though she's engaged to Henry. No wonder Henry transferred here from another city all of a sudden. So this is the reason. Is his name Jacob? Yes, Sophie admitted herself that he's her boyfriend. Jacob's kind of cute too. They're different. Henry's a little cool with a mean personality, whereas Jacob looks okay but has no unique personality.
All sorts of chatter sounded, and Jacob's acute hearing caught all the gossip. Personality. I guess pretending to be cool would be the so-called personality in these high schoolers' eyes, he thought. They combined their imaginations with assumptions, distorting the facts into a complete mess. Jacob had to admire these girls' information-combining abilities, by which they connected a few irrelevant things and narrated them as if they were facts. Sophie walked up to Jacob slowly, with a reluctant look on her face.
She is coming too?
Sophie asked, while giving Kathy a look.
Yes, she's coming with us,
Jacob said. Kathy sensed the hostility in Sophie's eyes. Jacob had said that Sophie was his fiancée, but she had thought he was joking at the time. Sophie's age made the whole thing unrealistic. The Rolls Royce came slowly toward them. All the students near the school gate felt like they were in for a great show. Therefore, they all stood still and looked in Jacob's direction. The window lowered slowly, and Henry's pale yet arrogant face appeared behind the window. Soph, I don't care about what does or does not happen in the next 3 years. All I know is that you will be mine in these 3 years, he articulated clearly as he stared at Sophie.
Get lost,
Sophie shouted angrily. I will come to find you at school tomorrow. Henry turned to Jacob with the same expression. The bus came at this moment. Sophie wasn't in the mood to talk to Henry any longer, so she stepped onto the bus. Compared to getting upset at Kathy, Sophie was more in a rush of getting rid of Henry's annoying face. Jacob and Kathy followed her onto the bus. All the students were stupefied. Sophie went on the bus with her boyfriend Jacob instead of getting a ride in Henry's Rolls Royce? They thought. Another wave of discussion started. Henry gritted his teeth with a gloomy face and said to Reggie, who was driving the vehicle, Let's go." He thought that the cheerful and charming Sophie would be his, since South Atlantic proposed the marriage aggressively. However, Jacob came in their way, messing up the entire plan. The North Atlantic Dragon Clan was going to let Sophie marry a human for the reason of the lost dragon core. How could Henry not be mad seeing his future wife falling into another person's hand? Sophie was the princess of the North Atlantic and a beautiful girl. The more she ignored him, the more Henry wanted to get her. "Reggie, investigate Jacob's background carefully. I will make him kneel in front of me and beg." Henry knocked his fist heavily on the leather seat and said to the driver, Episode 252. Grandma is back. Sophie sat beside the window when they got on the bus, ignoring Jacob and Kathy. She was too upset about the whole situation to talk right now. It was rush hour for students. Because Jacob and Kathy were a few steps behind, the seat beside Sophie was taken by an excited little boy. Sophie stared out the window quietly as the bus headed forward. Kathy seemed a bit embarrassed. She hadn't meant to create problems between Jacob and Sophie, but she couldn't do anything about it right now, as the situation was too complicated for her to understand fully. "It had been cloudy the past few days, and it's finally sunny," Kathy said as she looked at the sunset. Jacob nodded. "Yeah." Seeing how she was, Jacob assumed she didn't know about the Nine Dragon Palace. After a few stops, Jacob told Sophie gently, "Time to change the bus, Soph." She stood up without a word and followed Jacob towards the exit. The three of them got off the bus to wait for another one. Jacob was taller than Kathy, and Kathy was taller than Sophie. The three of them looked interesting standing in line. If it weren't for Grandma's insistence, Jacob would never make the two of them meet again. The bus stopped in front of them. Sophie stepped in first. She held Jacob's arm to keep her balance in the crowded bus. She dragged Jacob to two empty seats. Therefore, Kathy could only sit behind them by herself when she got on the bus. Jacob looked back at Kathy with an apologetic face. Sophie still had her stern face, not willing to talk. She rested her chin on her arm as she looked at the ocean a few hundred meters away. They kept quiet in the awkwardness until the bus arrived by the beach. There was still some distance to cover from here to Jacob's beach house. Jacob considered that they both must be tired and asked, "Do you want to stay here, and I'll go back and come to get you in the car?" Then he immediately wondered if they would get into a fight if he left them here.
"That's all right. I'll walk with you,"
Kathy said. Sophie gritted her teeth.
"I'll walk as well."
She wanted to wait for Jacob to pick her up in his car. But since Kathy wanted to walk, she had to walk with them. "Okay, let's go then. If you get tired on the way, you can wait for me to get the car," Jacob said. Kathy nodded. It was getting dark, and she thought it might be dangerous for her and Sophie to wait for Jacob on the roadside. Plus, there weren't many vehicles or pedestrians passing by. It never occurred to her that her 5-elemental note could take care of 5 to 6 bad guys easily. This 5-elemental note was planted in her body by the old woman. It lived and grew in nature and would never be used up. The so-called life-death note was to inject the 5-elemental note into someone's body according to their acupoints. The life note could save a life, while the death note could kill the enemies. The 5-elemental note Kathy had in her palm today was the life note the old woman saved and stored in the acupoint on her palm. It could help her absorb the nature essence and allow her to do half the work with double the results. The explosion that the old woman created in Jacob's body was from a death note. It had a destructive function, but helped Jacob to break through over 10 openings when used perfectly. But it was still a painful process, and she intended to punish him for mistreating Kathy. Otherwise, the little death note was enough to take Jacob's life, since he wasn't even on the 3rd level. Kathy had the life note given by the old woman in person. The power of it was no less than the dragon core in Jacob's body. However, the dragon core could not actively defeat the enemy, whereas the life-death note combined cultivation and technique. The old woman only taught Kathy one spell and gave her a life note. That was enough to generate tremendous power to defeat enemies. Jacob didn't waste any time, as they both wished to walk with him. So, he led the way by walking in front of them. At first, Kathy and Sophie were walking behind him. After a little while, they each walked to his side. Half the sun already sank under the surface of the ocean, and the sunset covered the ocean with a golden blanket. The clouds kept changing in shapes and colors in the sky. They turned from a light gold into dark yellow. The evening glow was magnificent. The beautiful sun dragged their shadows long. They all kept quiet as they headed toward the ocean. They walked for half an hour. Sophie's legs got sore, so she wanted a break. But when she saw Kathy walking with ease, she pretended to be okay and kept walking. She wondered how a human was walking for so long with such ease. If only she knew that Kathy wasn't an ordinary human now. Jacob slowed down when he noticed Sophie frowning. "Are you okay? Do you want to wait here as I go get the car? It might be a while if we keep walking."
How much longer?"
Sophie looked at Jacob as she hesitated. She was determined to prove that she was just as capable as both of them, even though she didn't know that Kathy was now a cultivator as well, which made her stronger. "Half an hour with this speed," Jacob answered.
"How about you go get the car, and I'll wait here with Sophie?"
Kathy said immediately. She felt it was bizarre that she wasn't tired yet after walking for so long. But Sophie rolled her eyes at Kathy's kindness.
"Never mind. We'll get there soon. I'm not tired, just a little thirsty."
"Are you sure?" Jacob questioned her. He remembered when they climbed the mountain she wasn't this weak. Now her physique, as well as her physical power, were both weakened.
"I said I'm fine,"
Sophie shouted out abruptly. Jacob was too scared to ask again, so he merely slowed down his speed.
"Or you could carry her on your back for a bit, Jacob,"
Kathy suddenly suggested. "Oh." Jacob stopped to turn to Sophie. "Want me to carry you?"
"No."
Sophie's bared teeth made her look like a small, angry wolf. Jacob laughed, speechlessly, and headed forward. However, Sophie wasn't following him. Sophie thought for a moment that she was too tired to walk anymore, and if Jacob carried her, it might make Kathy mad. The added incentive of reclaiming her stake in Jacob made her rethink her decision.
"On second thought, I think you should carry me. I'm really tired,"
she said. Jacob wondered what made her change her mind, but didn't question it. He bent down in front of her and helped Sophie climb onto his back. Once her hands were securely latched around his neck, he stood back up. "Okay, let's go." Jacob gripped the inside of her knees and continued to walk in the direction of the setting sun. Kathy smiled in resignation and walked beside them. There was no use in denying that Jacob and Sophie shared a special bond with each other. She just had to figure out now where she would fit into this equation. The things that were happening to her were all new and confusing, and the fact that Jacob might be able to help her understand some of it was a huge relief. Kathy knew that she needed Jacob right now, but she couldn't blame Sophie for feeling insecure about her fiancé either. Sophie wound her arms around Jacob's neck and placed her cheek on his head. All of a sudden, she felt touched. Jacob's steps were steady, and even Kathy noticed that he was trying to adjust his steps to avoid jolting Sophie. She could feel Jacob's gentle care for Sophie. She wouldn't be so surprised if she saw Jacob's anxiety when he searched for medicine for a sick Sophie a couple of days ago. They finally reached the gate of the villa. Grandma was waiting for them, leaning against the doorframe.
Grandma!
At the sight of Grandma, Sophie immediately jumped off from Jacob's back and ran to her. Jacob rubbed his shoulders and smiled at the close bond she shared with his grandmother.
Soph!
Grandma spread her arms and took Sophie into her arms. During her stay at her friend's place, she had the time of her life, helping her friend in the orchard, and enjoyed her company. However, she had missed Soph very much. Kathy walked over and said gently,
Grandma. Oh, my little Kathy.
Grandma reached out her wrinkled hand and took Kathy into her arms too. She had missed her as well. She didn't want to let either of the girls out of her arms. In contrast, she neglected her own grandson, Jacob.
Come on in. It's cold outside.
Grandma led Sophie and Kathy into the house, each hand holding one girl. Poor Jacob followed them inside after the hard labor of carrying Sophie on his back all the way home. Grandma gave all her attention to Sophie and Kathy, and didn't even spare him a glance. Episode 253, Sleeping Arrangements.
Grandma, what did you get me?
Sophie asked immediately when they were inside the house.
I brought you your favorite.
Out of nowhere, Grandma opened a bag. Sophie leaned over and cried excitedly,
Yams!
Jacob was speechless. Seriously? Yams?
I knew you liked to eat yams. You and Jacob stole the yams, and the villager told me all about it.
Grandma patted Sophie's head, and her eyes were full of affection.
Kathy, I didn't buy you anything. I brought you some wild vegetables from the mountains. I just wanted to see you.
Grandma looked at Kathy affectionately. Kathy smiled gently. She too had great affection for Jacob's grandma. How come Uncle James isn't here today? Seeing their excitement, Jacob walked over and finally had the chance to speak.
He doesn't know I came home today. I guess he's in his own home.
Grandma looked at Jacob.
I haven't seen you for a while, and you seem to have grown again.
Grandma, I missed you too, Jacob said.
You're lying. You didn't call me very often. I guess you will become like your father one day.
Grandma scolded Jacob with a smile. Her love for her grandson was obvious.
The three of you stay here today and no one goes back,
Grandma demanded. She looked at Sophie.
I'll call your parents about it.
Then she turned to Kathy.
Kathy, you also make a call and explain your absence tonight.
No problem,
Sophie agreed happily. Immediately, she took out her cell phone to make a call. Not wanting to disappoint Grandma, Kathy sent a message to her roommate, telling her that she wouldn't come back to the dorm tonight. As to what she would reply, Kathy didn't care.
I'm hungry. Which of you three is going to cook me dinner?
Grandma looked from one to the other, letting the children make the choice. Not even able to make fried eggs, Sophie remained silent when she heard the question. Kathy nodded.
Grandma, I'll make dinner.
Kathy walked into the kitchen and found the fridge was empty. Walking back into the living room, she picked up the yams and wild vegetables Grandma brought home and returned to the kitchen, putting on an apron.
I'm so glad you all are here,
Jacob's grandmother said. She was very fond of Sophie and thought she would make an adorable granddaughter-in-law. On the other hand, Grandma liked Kathy's gentleness and thought she would make a considerate and caring granddaughter-in-law. Looking at her grandson, who got more handsome each day, Grandma wanted the best for him. With one yam, a bunch of wild vegetables, and nothing else, Kathy cooked fragrant food. Jacob, who was not a good cook himself, was amazed by the variety she had managed to produce. Even Grandma was surprised.
Kathy, sweetheart, thank you.
Grandma came to the dinner table, pleased.
It's nothing, Grandma.
Kathy took off the apron and pulled the chair out for Grandma. Sophie was silent this whole time. As soon as she took a bite of the food, she was struck by the flavors. She had always thought that her mother was the best cook she knew, but tasting Kathy's food changed her opinion. Kathy was really talented. Not that Sophie would ever say that out loud.
Kathy, they are delicious.
Grandma was full of praise.
Grandma, it tastes good because of the wild vegetables you brought home.
Kathy was modest. Sitting in the house on the seaside, they could enjoy the view of the sea while they ate in the dining room. Jacob admired Kathy's excellent cooking skills. But, seeing Sophie's sulky face, he didn't dare to express his appreciation. He busied himself with eating. Happy and excited, Grandma told them about the life she lived in the countryside for the past month. She looked several years younger while she talked. By now, Sophie was back to her old self, and her non-stop chatter about her school life made Grandma laugh. Kathy didn't speak much. She was happy to see Grandma was excellent and healthy. After dinner, Jacob offered to stay behind to clear the table. The dinner was peaceful, but he felt it was the peace before the storm.
Kathy, Soph, come up to choose rooms. There are 3 rooms and 4 of us. What should we do?
Walking down the stairs, Grandma beckoned Sophie and Kathy.
How about you 2 share a room?
Grandma suggested.
No.
They refused at the same time. Grandma was surprised at their answer. In her eyes, Kathy and Sophie were both amazing girls who were supposed to like each other.
Then what's your suggestion?
Grandma asked, after a moment of hesitation. Jacob busied himself with clearing the table and didn't join the discussion. Obviously, placing Sophie and Kathy together was a bad idea.
How about you and I share a room and Kathy can sleep in one room by herself? I'm afraid we will disturb each other if I share a room with her,
Sophie said suddenly. Grandma agreed immediately. Kathy also gave in.
Okay, I'll sleep in the middle room.
The middle room was Walter and Mila's room. It was a big room, and Kathy would be comfortable in it.
Okay, that's settled. Kathy, your room is next to Jacob's, and if you have any problems, you go to him. And I will keep Soph company tonight.
Grandma pinched Sophie's cheeks and smiled. Hearing Grandma's words, Sophie was nervous again. But she had promised to share a room with Grandma and couldn't go back on her words.
Okay, let's go wash up and call it a night.
Seeming to have noticed the hostility between the girls, Grandma tried to smooth things over.
Okay, I'll help Jacob clean the dishes.
Kathy walked to the dining room. Sophie frowned as Kathy walked to Jacob's side and began to help him clear the table. Till now, even though she was insecure, she could feel that Kathy was a respectful person. But today, something was different. Kathy was clinging to Jacob's side as much as she could. Sophie couldn't figure out why that was, but she didn't like it.
Come into the room, Soph. I'll tell you more about the village.
Grandma held Sophie's hand and started for her room. Sophie looked up at Grandma's friendly face, feeling morose.
If Jacob is troubling you, you tell me, and I'll deal with him.
Caressing Sophie's face, Grandma took her into the room. In the dining room, Kathy was efficiently clearing up the dirty dishes. Then, they both wordlessly put them into the sink in the kitchen before washing and letting them dry.
It's late, and I'm going to bed now. Tomorrow we have classes.
Drying her hands with a small towel, Kathy said, Okay. Jacob looked at her and was at a loss for words. She walked to the stairs, and Jacob heard her soft steps on the floor and a soft click when her door closed. Looking at the surging dark sea outside, Jacob sighed slightly. Shutting the doors of the cupboard, he also walked up to the second floor. Sophie and Grandma were talking in their room, but they were 2 doors away with the door and windows closed. Jacob couldn't hear clearly what they were talking about, even with his acute hearing ability. Not wanting to eavesdrop at their door, he gave up any thought of listening to their conversation. He opened the window inside his room to a crack and let the humid air come into the room. Then he sat down on the bed cross-legged and began cultivating the Sword Shadow Scroll. The Sword Shadow Scroll absorbed the essence of nature to replenish the stock in his body while maintaining the balance of the 5 elements. By now, Jacob had unlocked 39 openings and was only 1 step away from the 3rd level. He didn't know that Kathy in the next room didn't sleep either. She was also sitting cross-legged, cultivating. Despite their different cultivation techniques, they both absorbed the essence in nature to nurture their bodies. It was a common cultivation technique among human cultivators. Surges of essence began to accumulate from the surrounding areas miles away from there. They came to the air above the house before turning into pure 5-element sparks, flying toward Kathy's room. If any human cultivators had seen such a scene, they would have thought a nascent Soul Realm master was cultivating there. Turning the chaotic essence from nature into the pure 5-elemental essences before absorbing them into the body was the awe-inspiring cultivation technique that only nascent Soul Realm masters could manage. However, this effect came from the life note in Kathy's palm. Episode 254, The 3rd Level. With the life note, cultivators could steal the life essence from nature and insert it into their own bodies. By condensing the nature essence into the purest elements and injecting them into her body, Kathy was practicing a great technique. The reason that the old woman planted such a powerful life note in Kathy was not that she had great talent in cultivation. On the contrary, it was because Kathy's cultivation talent was too poor. Among the 100% nature essence energy, she could at most absorb only 1%, which meant that 99% of the pure nature essence was wasted and would return to nature. Besides, Kathy was an inexperienced cultivator. Afraid that the salty wind would damage the furniture in the room, she had shut the windows tightly. That was why the windows blocked the large amounts of pure nature essence that all cultivators coveted. Only a tiny part of it penetrated the windows in the form of faint light unseen to the naked eye and entered Kathy's body. In the room next to hers, Jacob was cultivating quietly while the dragon core in his body was absorbing the surrounding essence like a small engine. Most of the nature essence blocked by Kathy's windows began to enter Jacob's room through the open window. The intensity of the essence in the room was so great that it could rival ninth heaven. Jacob shivered, and his dragon core began to absorb the large amounts of essence without having to condense them. In the hidden space, Snowflake also sensed the change of essence intensity in the air, and it began to roll around desperately in the space. Usually, with the effects of the array formation, the hidden space's essence intensity was 2 or 3 times higher than that in the air outside. However, the current intensity of the essence in Jacob's room was 100 times higher than that of the hidden space. Jacob was immersed in cultivating and was oblivious to Snowflake's frantic jumping in the hidden space. With a bang, the most crucial 40th opening in the dragon core was unlocked. It was the result of the force of the surging essence. Like the whirlpool currents under the power of an engine, the surges of essence pierced an opening in the dragon core. 3rd level. It was the equivalent to the core formation realm for the human cultivators. With the formation of the gold core, nature changed. In fact, the air above the house was already tumbling due to the activation of the life note in Kathy's palm. The completely activated dragon core began to swallow the surrounding essence like crazy to replenish the lost essence in the dragon core. By now, 40 openings evenly positioned in the dragon core were connected to each other. This was a small-scale array formation, essence absorption array formation. It was a unique feature of the dragon core, and the reason why the dragon cultivators had a faster cultivation speed than human cultivators. Snowflake was still tumbling in the hidden space, desperate to get out. After the elevation of his realm, Jacob felt refreshed. Through the crack in the window, he shot out a beam of sword energy. The white beam of sword energy shot into the sky and disappeared into the dark clouds. It flew hundreds of miles in the blink of an eye. Jacob felt he had boundless nature essence at his command. The feeling of core formation was totally different from that of the Foundation establishment. Sensing Snowflake's frantic movements in the hidden space, Jacob finally let it out. It jumped out immediately and raised its nose in the air, absorbing the pure essence in the room desperately. Flames enveloped Snowflake's paws, and its body was filled with essence instantly. Parts of its 4 paws turned golden. It had successfully elevated into a level 3 spirit beast. In the next room, Kathy lamented, "Why is cultivation so hard? I don't feel a thing after cultivating for such a long while." She fell back onto the bed. Resigned, she pulled up the quilt and stopped cultivating. She didn't know that she had absorbed less than 1% of the abundant nature essence. Most of the essence had returned to nature, and Jacob absorbed a small part of it, and Snowflake absorbed an even smaller part. After elevating to the 3rd level, the equivalent of the core formation realm, Jacob continued to circulate the Sword Shadow Scroll to solidify his realm. Meanwhile, Snowflake felt the fast disappearance of the nature essence. It barked frantically, but couldn't do anything about it. If the nature essence of such intensity could last a few more minutes, Snowflake would elevate even further. The night passed by quietly. The next morning, Jacob heard someone knock on his door. Sitting cross-legged, Jacob exhaled deeply before opening his eyes. "Who is it?"
"It's me. I made breakfast."
Kathy's crisp voice sounded from outside the door. "I just got up. I'm coming in a minute," Jacob answered her. Hearing Kathy's voice, Snowflake jumped up from the carpet and roared.
"Is Snowflake in there?"
About to go downstairs, Kathy heard the sounds and asked.
"Yeah."
Resigned, Jacob walked over and opened the door. Snowflake ran to Kathy and jumped into her arms. It seemed to like Kathy just as much as Sophie. Jacob wondered if it was because they were girls.
"Why does it have golden fur on its paws?"
Kathy petted Snowflake and found the difference in its paws.
"No idea. Maybe it evolved,"
Jacob answered casually. Kathy nodded. Then she gave him a look.
"Are you going back to bed? Get downstairs for breakfast."
Okay. Rubbing his eyes, he followed Kathy downstairs. In fact, Jacob was energetic due to his recent breakthrough into the 3rd level. Besides, he had not slept at all last night, and he felt wronged being called out by Kathy. Grandma was already sitting in the dining room, and beside her was Sophie.
"Snowflake!"
Sophie had been sulky, but she grew excited at the sight of Snowflake. She beckoned to Snowflake, who immediately jumped from Kathy's arms to the ground before dashing towards Sophie. With its golden paws, it looked like it was running on 4 golden clouds. It was an awe-inspiring sight. Snowflake jumped into Sophie's arms with such great force that it almost pushed her to the floor. The moment it was in her arms, Snowflake began to lick Sophie's neck fawningly, making her giggle.
"Whose dog is this?"
Grandma asked.
"One of my classmates gave it to me,"
Jacob said. Since he couldn't tell his grandma, it was, in fact, a lion. Anyway, there was not a trace of a lion's dignity in Snowflake.
"It's a pretty dog, but your mom will probably have an issue with it."
Watching Snowflake frolicking with Sophie, Grandma said, "She's not here." Sitting at the table, Jacob opened the milk carton and began to eat the breakfast that Kathy cooked.
"It has been more than a month now. I guess they will return soon. Otherwise, I would have stayed longer at my friend's place,"
Grandma said. "Really?" Jacob was surprised. Recently, he had not spared a thought for his always absent parents. He was surprised they would come back soon. Hearing the news about the imminent return of Jacob's parents, Sophie and Kathy's eyes lit up.
"They called me a couple of days ago. When she comes back, your mom will become the head of an institute that studies ecosystems or something, with a significant raise or something. I'm not sure about the details, though."
Grandma mumbled with the soft yams in her mouth. "What about Dad?" Jacob asked immediately.
"It seems he will get a promotion as well, but I don't quite remember to what level."
Grandma waved her hand uninterestedly. All she cared about was Jacob and his life. She generally didn't bother to keep up with her son and daughter-in-law since they didn't bother to keep up with her.
"Okay."
Jacob nodded and continued to eat, wondering if his parents would be even busier after the promotions.
"Grandma, Snowflake is well behaved. Let it stay home and keep you company."
Sophie lifted Snowflake and said to Grandma,
"Okay. Anyway, you can't take a little dog to college. Let it stay."
Grandma said with a laugh. Seeming to have understood their conversation, Snowflake suddenly became agitated. It jumped into Sophie's arms, not wanting to stay home. After all, many girls loved it and fed it at the university. If it stayed home, it would be trapped with the old lady. However, Jacob didn't give it any choice. After breakfast, he led Kathy and Sophie out the door, leaving Snowflake with Grandma. After all, Grandma was alone, and the little dog could keep her company. Besides, Snowflake was a spirit beast that could protect Grandma if she was in any danger. But Snowflake didn't like this idea. Episode 255, Henry's Surprise Attack. Jacob drove his dad's car out of the garage, where the Ferrari was also parked, a gift from Helen. However, Jacob didn't want to drive such a fancy car to school. After all, keeping a low profile was important. The car drove along the road by the seaside, and the scenes were enjoyable. While Sophie watched the sea on their left, she saw Jacob's profile. She was surprised that Jacob had grown more handsome than yesterday. She didn't know that Jacob had broken through to the 3rd level last night. He had a different aura. Sophie furrowed her eyebrows, trying to determine what was different. "What's the matter? Do you have a headache?" Seeing her frown, Jacob asked anxiously. "No, it's nothing." Sophie shook her head, and Jacob was about to ask again, but she gave him a look of finality. Sitting in the back seat, Kathy watched them bicker with a faint smile. "Snowflake!" Sophie shouted suddenly. Jacob looked toward the window close to Sophie's seat and found a mini-sized snowflake hovering in the air outside of the window. With flames enveloping its paws and its tongue hanging out, it kept at the same speed as the car. Kathy had been watching the sea on the left side of the road. Hearing Sophie shout, she also saw the flying snowflake. She had never imagined the little dog would be able to fly. The events in the last couple of days had changed her views about almost everything.
"That's weird. How could a mini-sized snowflake fly? Did it elevate to a higher level?"
Sophie wondered out loud while she rolled down the window. Her words reminded Jacob. Had Snowflake also elevated? Jacob was sure it had when he saw its 4 golden paws. If it had not elevated, it would never have been able to use its innate power at will. A little dog flying with flames on his toes alongside a fast car would be an astonishing sight for any stranger. It was fortunate that it was early morning and theirs was the only car driving on the seaside road. Snowflake flew through the open window and jumped into Sophie's arms joyously. "Hey, didn't I tell you to stay with Grandma?" Jacob glared at it while driving. However, Snowflake pretended to be dumb. It licked Sophie's palms and made her laugh. Although shameless, it was brilliant. After some observations, it had found that Sophie was in a higher position than Jacob on the food chain. Snowflake had to listen to Jacob, and Jacob must listen to Sophie. That was why it fawned over Sophie, the big boss. Sure enough, Jacob couldn't reprimand it properly when it was in Sophie's arms. Under Sophie's protection, Snowflake knew it was safe from Jacob's displeasure. "What is Snowflake?" Kathy asked cautiously from behind. "It's a spirit beast, one of level 2. Jacob had been a cultivation layman a couple of months ago, but now he could teach Kathy some stuff about it." "Level 2 spirit beast," Kathy murmured to herself as if she was digesting this information. "Grandma must be bored at home by herself.
I'll ask my mom to pick Grandma up tonight, and she can come over to our house. She can also stay with us for a couple of days,"
Sophie suggested while petting Snowflake's soft fur. "That's a good idea. You can call her and see if she's willing to go," Jacob answered. Sitting in the back seat, Kathy listened to them talk like a couple, and suddenly she felt like an outsider. While Jacob drove the car, Snowflake frolicked with Sophie until the latter gave it 3 essence replenishment pills. Then it crawled to the back seat and took a nap beside Kathy. Jacob had seen through its tricks. The creature couldn't ditch him, the master, but it would rather stay with beautiful girls instead of Grandma, an old lady. Well, it's useless to reason with a spirit beast. From the back mirror of the car, Jacob saw Snowflake rubbing its golden paws on Kathy's thighs while sleeping. Jacob sighed silently. Jacob drove Sophie to her home with the yams his grandma gave her. Then he drove to the university, since it was still early for Sophie to go to school. She would rest in her home before Helen drove her to school. Jacob restarted the car. Kathy remained in the back seat. She didn't ask to move to the front passenger seat. Without Sophie's babbling, it was quiet in the car. Jacob was considering if he should turn on the radio to break the silence when Kathy said abruptly, "Jacob, am I overstepping my boundaries here?" Still sleeping, Snowflake turned on her thighs. Lying on its back, it continued its nap. "Why do you say that?" Jacob's heart lurched. "I used to think it was impossible between you and Sophie because of the age gap, but I find that you two are quite compatible," Kathy said in a low voice. After a moment of consideration, Jacob said, "There are things that you don't know yet. Since you are almost a part of this circle now, I'll explain everything to you." "Okay, go ahead," Kathy nodded gently. It happened. Jacob was interrupted when a Rolls-Royce suddenly cut in front of him. "I was going to your school to find you and didn't expect I'd run into you here." The window of the Rolls-Royce rolled down and Henry's face appeared behind it. "Reggie, hit him," Henry instructed in a light tone. At that, Reggie, who was driving the car, pulled the steering wheel towards Jacob's car. Without any hesitation, he used the Rolls-Royce's huge body to put pressure on Jacob's Ford. Although Jacob hadn't been driving a lot in the past, he was no rookie either. He turned the steering wheel and avoided them when they tried to switch lanes. However, the drastic turn caused the tires to screech against the road, and Kathy, who was sitting in the back, was pushed down because of the momentum. Henry was laughing, and Jacob was enraged. Just because his opponent was an ordinary person, the Crown Prince thinks he can bully others as he wants? "Push him again!" Henry saw Jacob's angry face and gave another order. Jacob decided not to bother with him anymore, so he stepped on the gas pedal and quickly went through the intersection. "Want to escape? Not so easy." Henry was enjoying the game of chase. "Reggie, chase him! Hit him!" Kathy, who was sitting in the back, turned around and saw the Rolls-Royce chasing after them. She asked worriedly, "Who are they?" "It's a long story. I will tell you when we get away from them." Jacob stepped on the gas pedal again. They were half an hour away from the city's rush hour. More and more cars started to appear on the road. Although Jacob's Ford wasn't a big car, it was well taken care of. Jacob was driving through the traffic and made it through all the green lights. Yet Reggie's driving skills were superior. As the top assassin of the South Atlantic, he was no weaker than any of the top agents. Even if Jacob were driving a Porsche instead of a normal Ford, Reggie would still be able to chase after him with confidence. As if it was a blink of an eye, the Rolls-Royce appeared in front of Jacob's Ford. If they turned their car sideways, they could have blocked Jacob's way out and made him crash the car into themselves. Just before the turn signal was on, Jacob didn't have the time to think. He switched the car to the turning lane and made a left turn immediately. The black Rolls-Royce followed closely, as if a wolf was chasing after a sheep. The Rolls-Royce hit the back of the white Ford. Jacob and Kathy jolted forward as they were inside the car. Jacob gritted his teeth and stepped on the gas once again as he drove towards the western suburbs. The two cars were rushing into the city early in the morning. It would be bad if anyone got hit. Yet, this crown prince of the South Atlantic did not think of that at all. "Kathy, I'm driving towards the western suburbs. I will drop you off when I get the chance," Jacob said while he was concentrating on the steering wheel.
"Who are they?"
Kathy asked again while she turned around and looked at the cold-blooded man with a scar on his face who was inside the Rolls-Royce. "Some grudges within the circle." Jacob sped up. He was going way over the speed limit now, but couldn't find it in himself to care. The Rolls-Royce was still following closely behind them. Episode 256. Kill Jacob and Kathy. Kathy saw Jacob starting to get serious. She didn't ask further questions as he had to concentrate on driving. She held Snowflake in her arms and held onto the armrest. One car was chasing after another. Within 20 minutes, they arrived in the western suburbs. As Jacob realized that there was no way he could escape from them, he stepped on the brake and stopped the car on the side of the road. The Rolls-Royce pulled over and blocked the way of the Ford. Reggie remained ice cold and did not speak. Henry lowered the window and said, arrogantly, "So, you decided to stop running now?" Jacob opened the door and walked to the back of the car. He then saw the bumper of the car was a little off, but the car was perfectly fine. If the car were broken, he wouldn't know how to explain it to his father. Henry walked out of the car as well and stared at Jacob. "Call me Master from now on and let me beat you up. Then leave Sophie alone and I will let you go." In the meantime, Kathy got out of the car from the back seat. Henry laid his eyes on Kathy and said, "Oh, wow, this beautiful girl will be mine as well." Kathy looked at him speechlessly and thought, "Who is this kid? He is so rude and entitled, as if he owns the world." "Reggie, put her into the car." Henry released an order. Reggie stepped out of the Rolls-Royce emotionlessly and walked toward Kathy. Henry could feel the nature essence inside Kathy's body. Since he was a cultivator, there was nothing he wouldn't dare to do. Not to mention that Kathy had a superior temperament and appearance. Golden sword energy shot towards Henry's face. Henry's provocations did not bother Jacob. However, Jacob would not tolerate him as he tries to hurt Kathy. Henry waved his hand as he wanted to block the sword energy. However, he found himself taking a few steps back due to the force. Jacob made Kathy stay behind him and stared coldly at Henry and Reggie, who had a scar on his face. "Haven't seen you in a few days, and you've reached the 3rd level." Henry was shocked. He then decided that Jacob had to be taken care of. Henry wasn't only arrogant, he was even more malicious than his grandfather. As he would become the king of South Atlantic one day, he was trained to be murderous and decisive by Grandmaster Hank, even though he was still young. Jacob has improved so much in such a short amount of time, which exceeded Henry's expectations. If he let Jacob continue to grow, Jacob would become his biggest opponent in the future. Henry did not hesitate further. He released a black handprint directly toward Jacob. Jacob grabbed Kathy and took a step back. Snowflake suddenly turned big as it gently pushed Jacob and Kathy with its head and put them onto its back. Fires appeared around its paws as it flew toward a small mountain. "Want to escape?" Henry ran across the road while he was chanting at the same time. Then he took off and flew towards Jacob. On the other hand, Reggie, who was wearing a suit and had a cold-blooded face, formed a red energy sphere without the need to chant and started flying towards Jacob. A first-level girl and a kid who had just reached the 3rd level. Reggie didn't care about them at all. He would not hesitate to kill them if Henry ordered him to do so. However, it seemed like the Crown Prince of South Atlantic enjoyed chasing and torturing them more at this moment. On Snowflake's back, Jacob saw them getting closer and closer. So he tapped on Snowflake's back and said, "Descend!" Snowflake went straight down and landed in an empty valley. Although their city was next to the sea, and the coastal area was a plain formed by the impact of sediments, the suburb had a hilly terrain. There were barely any human activities there, since the mountains had not yet been developed. It was Kathy's first time sitting on Snowflake's back. While they were flying, she was holding onto Snowflake's white fur as she felt nervous. As they all landed, Snowflake stood next to Jacob and roared furiously towards Henry, who was flying quickly towards them. A fireball that was as big as a giant rock shot towards Henry, who was trying to land. This fireball was even bigger than Henry. And the speed of the fireball was so fast as if it was a cannonball. It was extremely powerful. Since Henry didn't have any weapons and was caught off guard, all he could do was form an energy sphere with his bare hands. The fireball hit Henry's enchantment and immediately shattered it into pieces. His body flew 100 meters backward, and his hair was all burnt. "Snowflake, impressive." Jacob looked at Snowflake, shocked. The fireball attack was comparable to a 3rd-level cultivator's full-blown attack. Snowflake raised its head proudly and shook its white hair as it pretended to be powerful. It was so proud at the moment. Jacob wanted to compliment it once again. However, a second later, Snowflake started shrinking from a tall lion into a palm-sized white puppy. It lay next to Jacob's feet and started whining. It was the fireball attack that spent all of its nature essence. "Damn, it seems like I still can't count on you yet." Jacob picked Snowflake up and threw it back into the hidden space. Kathy was shocked as she saw everything that was happening. She still could not react to what had happened. Within a few seconds, Henry dived from the sky as fierce as he could be. From his birth to now, he had never been so humiliated in his life. It wasn't hard to understand why he was so mad. "Kathy, step aside." Jacob stood up straight and opened up the few hundred acupuncture points of his body. The Sword Shadow Scroll was quickly released. Spiritual auras started to gather on Jacob's body as he began flashing. Basic sword array, fire array. Many red fire sword energies started raining towards Henry. While Henry was still in the air, it was inconvenient for him to move. The fire sword energies started gathering together and formed 2 fire rings, as Henry was completely surrounded by them. A purple light suddenly shot from the side, shattering the 2 fire rings that were formed by 32 fire sword energies. "Collect!" Jacob used his mind power and gathered the pieces of shattered fire elemental sword energies back into his body. Sword Shadow Scroll could also be used to absorb elements. These pure fire elemental sword energies could be absorbed and released as needed. Therefore, even if the sword array was broken, the sword energies could still be retrieved and wouldn't be wasted.
It has only been a few days, and you've become so strong. It seems like you should not be kept alive any further.
Henry, finally landed on the ground, said fiercely while he was still in shock. He turned to Reggie, who just saved him, and said,
"Get rid of them."
"The girl can be taken care of. The boy is an assisting inspector," Reggie said coldly and calmly while he was holding Henry.
"Then kill the girl first."
Henry gnashed his teeth in anger and said, he wanted Kathy for himself at first, as he had seen how beautiful she was. But now, since he was burning with a frenzy of rage, all he wanted was to see Jacob cry bitterly. Reggie didn't want to get involved in this fight between the three kids, since he had reached the mid-tier 8th level, and they were all below 3rd level. However, he would not hesitate when Henry gave an order. He would kill anything that could be harmful to the Crown Prince of the South Atlantic if it wasn't too troublesome. Episode 257, Fighting Against Reggie. Jacob became nervous as he heard that they were trying to hurt Kathy. He used to think that Henry was a kid who would sometimes say harsh words out of discontent. He had never expected that the Crown Prince of South Atlantic Dragon Palace actually intended to kill people. "Snowflake!" Jacob released Snowflake from the hidden space. "Take Kathy away from here!" Staring at Reggie's wild eyes, Jacob sensed the heavy and dark murderous intent. Snowflake rolled out of the necklace. The golden bell was swinging in front of its neck with a tinkling sound. The only thing he could do at the moment was to get Jade and Julia there, but that would take time. Therefore, his only choice was to let Kathy get away while he tried to hold them off. Snowflake started to howl, and sparks came out of its paws. However, it couldn't grow any bigger. "It's useless. I can kill a level 3 spirit beast like that effortlessly." Slowly walking toward them, Reggie said in a deep voice. Jacob glanced at Henry, wondering how he could be so brutal at such a young age. Henry would be a horrible disaster if he ever took over the South Atlantic. It made sense that Dracon didn't want Sophie to marry Henry. As the thought crossed his mind, lightning shot out of his palm. Reggie reached out to grab the lightning and crushed it in his palm. As someone comparable in level, Reggie was inferior to Kenneth in terms of cultivation, but he didn't lack in terms of combat abilities. He could call himself the #1 cultivator in the mortal world, since Kenneth was missing and the other seniors in the dragon tribe were reluctant to get out of their seclusion. He had done some research on Jacob. He couldn't know Jacob's capabilities, cultivation techniques, and combat techniques any better. Jacob's lightning could break 5 elemental essences, but that only worked if his opponents were on the same level as him. It wouldn't harm anyone on the 8th level if they were prepared.
"Sneak attacking me? How dare you!"
Seeing another gray cloud of essence flying toward him, Henry shouted at Jacob.
"Kathy, you go first,"
Jacob said in a low voice. Although 3rd level couldn't compete against 8th level, he still wanted to buy some time for Kathy. "It's not going to help, no matter how you try to run." Reggie walked forward. Water elemental array formation. Streaks of ghastly blue sword energies stabbed at Reggie. Reggie lifted his arm and blocked. The 9 water elemental sword energies stabbed him in the palm, but couldn't go through his skin. The only thing they did to him was that they shook his arm a bit. Interesting. 4th level damage dealt by someone on the 3rd level. Reggie ignored Jacob's attack and kept walking toward him. However, his eyes were locked on Kathy. He pointed at Kathy. Kathy was in total shock. She still didn't figure out what was happening. Her mind was still blank when a thick purple light shot toward her. Jacob blocked this strike for her, and he backed off 1/2 meter and fell onto the ground. A big hole appeared in his body, out of which blood kept flowing. Jacob hadn't been injured ever since he started cultivating. His body was as firm as iron in comparison to ordinary people. However, his shoulder was stabbed easily by Reggie's finger strike. Kathy was terrified, since she had never been in such a situation.
Jacob!
She ran over to Jacob, trying to help him get up. Reggie struck out his finger immediately. If a senior cultivator were present and witnessed this, he or she would know that this was Reggie's famous finger technique, the demonic finger. Luckily, Reggie didn't use all of his strength. Otherwise, Jacob might have been killed by this fast and mystic demonic finger. Go! Jacob dragged on Kathy. Jacob was left with a bleeding hole in his left hand. You can choose to protect her over and over again, but don't blame me for your injuries, since you aren't my target, Reggie said gloomily.
Jacob!
Seeing blood continuously coming out of Jacob's shoulder and arms, tears rushed out of Kathy's eyes. Although she hadn't figured out what exactly was going on, there was no doubt Jacob would do whatever it took to protect her. One more shot left. The game will be over after my finger points at her heart. Slowly walking up to them, Reggie said. Jacob managed to stand up while bearing the extreme pain. He pulled Kathy, who had tears all over her face, behind him. What was happening at this moment went beyond his expectations. He thought the South Atlantic and North Atlantic were just at odds, but never expected that Henry would prey on innocent people.
Reggie, get me my golden spear. There's no need to leave that woman alive.
Standing not too far away, Henry said, giving his order. Reggie walked forward with a gloomy face. Hand in the golden spear so you can survive. Snowflake dashed up and started to bite Reggie's pants. Get away! Reggie kicked his leg forward. Snowflake crashed into the mountain in the distance after tumbling in the air. It won't take me too much effort to open up your hidden space and get the golden spear. Walking up to Jacob, Reggie stopped when he was only 2 steps away from him. Powerful and threatening pressure overwhelmed him instantly. Golden spear, fine. Jacob took the golden spear out of his hidden space. As Reggie was about to reach for it, Jacob suddenly released all of his lightning instead. The flashing light and rumbling thunder extended from the shank all the way to the tip of the spear. As Henry was connected to the natal treasure, he instantly felt extreme pain. His mind got injured, and he wasn't able to keep his balance. Kill him! Henry gave his order. It was dangerous to oppose the inspectors, but Jacob was just an assisting inspector. Nobody would know the truth, as they were in the middle of nowhere. Kathy suddenly ran out from Jacob's back and stood in front of him. Her tears were all dried up. Instead, there was only determination left on her face. She had no clue what kind of a world this was, but she would never allow Reggie to kill Jacob. Your resistance is futile. Reggie stepped up and grabbed Kathy by her neck. As a secret master in the South Atlantic, he had slid over the informers arranged by the inspector, and the cultivators he killed in the past hundreds of years were countless. There were times when he missed and encountered inspectors. He would just kill them without a second thought. Kathy was having trouble breathing. Her face turned from pink to pale immediately. However, she didn't plan to get out of the way, even though she was in danger.
How dare you touch someone who is guarded by me?
An angry howl came from the sky all of a sudden. A 10-meter wide green light landed. Reggie sensed something strange, so he dodged and transformed into a streak of light. His experience of killing for hundreds of years had given him a sense of danger. However, he was firmly smashed by the green light when he had only flown tens of meters away. Reggie's body fell at the speed of a bullet. Dust rose from all directions. Reggie landed and was embedded at least half a meter into the ground. A dozen golden notes shot into every key acupoint in Reggie's body. Shortly, all the acupoints exploded, one after another. Reggie, who was a mid-tier 8th-level cultivator, lost all of his strength and was left never to be able to cultivate again.
The Dragon God Shrine will take you now.
The giant green light waved and sucked the half-dead Reggie up into the air. The light then transformed into a small palm and flew towards Henry, who was overly stunned.
How can someone at such a young age be so brutal?
The phantom-like palm slapped Henry on the face repeatedly. He was spinning so much that he could see sparks fly.
I'll leave the rest for you to take care of.
The giant hand, formed by the green light, left with the unconscious Reggie and flew to the west. Episode 258, Kathy's Healing Powers. Reggie had been taken away like a rag doll. However, blood was still gushing endlessly out of Jacob's wounds. "Grandma," Kathy murmured as she stared at the sky. Then she helped Jacob to stand up and asked, "How are you feeling?" "Blood's gushing out like water." Jacob gave her a bitter smile. Henry, who was standing a short distance away from them, picked up his golden spear, but was afraid to move around. "Don't move, Jacob. Let me try." Kathy covered the wound on Jacob's hand with her right hand. The golden note in her palm started to rotate slowly. Then, the wound began shrinking unbelievably. Within seconds, everything recovered as if nothing had happened. The only thing that could prove the existence of the serious wound was the hole in his shirt. "This..." Jacob stared at Kathy in shock. "Grandma had told me that the life-death note controls life and death directly. It can kill or save people within seconds." Similarly, as golden lights flashed, the wound on Jacob's shoulder healed, and his skin turned smooth again. Not even a trace of scar could be found. As for Kathy, it seemed like it didn't take her much effort to use the golden note twice. "So, does this mean..." Jacob looked at Kathy in amazement and thought, "As long as I'm alive, I will be able to recover from any injuries with the help of Kathy?" Although the old woman didn't show up, she injected a dozen golden notes into Reggie's body. Those notes had exploded and destroyed every meridian in his body and left him no chance to cultivate ever again. This was the power of the Death Note. However, she had controlled the power of the Death Note purposely and kept him alive. She was going to let the Dragon God Shrine take care of the rest. Otherwise, she could have controlled the nature essence inside Reggie by using the Death Note, and Reggie, who was on mid-tier 8th level, would have exploded.
Is everything all right now?
Kathy looked at Jacob with tears all over her face. I'm fine now. Jacob shook his arm and didn't feel any pain. Meanwhile, Henry was about to run away with the golden spear in his hand, but was instantly spotted by Jacob. Realizing that Jacob was staring at him, Henry started to shiver.
You can take care of the rest.
The words left by the old woman when she was taking Reggie away were still ringing in his ears.
My grandpa wouldn't let you go if you ever touch me.
After thinking for a while, Henry straightened his back and said, I'm not taking advantage of you. This is just a practice. Jacob stood up and dusted himself off. A red energy sphere appeared instantly.
Who wants to practice with you?
Henry started to panic, but he wasn't too scared since he had his natal treasure in hand. He shot a beam of golden light toward Jacob immediately. The golden spear could unleash all of its power without being restricted by the natural laws in Nine Dragon Palace. Just like how Jacob's sword array formations could unleash the power of the 4th level, Henry's golden spear could also release the power of the 4th level. It was this natal treasure that empowered him and enabled him never to lose a single battle against the cultivators who were within the same level as him. This was precisely where his arrogance came from. Earth Elemental Sword Array Formation. The long-awaited and thick sword energies dashed out fiercely. A yellow disc appeared and spun toward Henry. The Earth Elemental essence was supposed to be majestic like the great mountains. When placed in this sword array, its powerful attack could suffocate enemies. The golden light that came out of Henry's golden spear was cracked down immediately by the sword array formation created by the Earth Elemental sword energies. It was a battle of the 3rd level. Jacob was at the low tier, while Henry was at the top tier. However, the result was evident, as one of them had his anger burst out, while the other began to panic. Henry was knocked out dozens of meters away by the Earth Elemental Sword Array formation. He could barely stand up, even with the help of the golden spear. Jacob didn't want to push him around too much, since he was just a high school student. Thus, he took back the sword energies and didn't bother talking to him anymore. Snowflake slowly crawled out of the pile of rocks in the distance. There was still some blood in the corner of its mouth. It was kicked away by Reggie and got seriously injured.
Snowflake!
Kathy rushed to Snowflake and started to cure its injuries. Within 2 seconds, Snowflake turned into its snow lion form with its claws flaring. Snowflake was also at level 3. Henry assessed his situation and realized that he wouldn't be able to win since Jacob and Snowflake were both at 3rd level and Kathy would be able to heal them infinitely. What he didn't know was that Jade and Julia had received the signal from the bell and were trying to locate and rescue them. They would tear Henry apart if they saw that Jacob was injured. The North Atlantic had to take the overall situation into consideration, and the old woman couldn't embarrass the Dragon God Shrine too much. However, the sisters didn't care that much.
I was just trying to scare you. I didn't mean to kill you.
Holding the golden spear, Henry said as he shivered. Jacob didn't want to waste time listening to his explanation. He called Snowflake over and sat on its back with Kathy. Snowflake howled and flew into the sky. 6 sword energies shot straight down from the sky, creating 6 big holes neatly around Henry. They were warnings from Jacob. Snowflake had already flown hundreds of meters in the air. Jacob stopped it at the side of the road and put Snowflake away in the hidden space and fed it 2 basic essence replenishment pills. Jacob fed Snowflake at least 2 pills a day, only hoping that it wouldn't be hungry. However, he didn't know that Snowflake was getting further on the path of advancement. On Sixth Heaven, the Sky Mountain sect that specializes in raising spirit beasts would only feed them 1 pill a month. The way Jacob raised Snowflake was insane. Inside the Snow Lotus Cave, it didn't matter how magical the 7-colored Snow Lotus was. It was still a spiritual herb that had never been extracted or purified. Moreover, the number of snow lotuses was limited, so every grown snow lion could only have 1 little piece. However, Snowflake wouldn't think about how lucky it was. Its rule was to eat when there was food and throw a tantrum when there wasn't. It forgot about the shame of being kicked away as soon as it took the pills. It then fell asleep after it found a corner in the hidden space. The sisters, who were hurrying to rescue them, lost their connection the moment Jacob put Snowflake into the hidden space. They landed in the valley and saw Henry, who had red palm marks on his face. Jade asked,
"Hey kid, have you seen our master?"
Henry stared at them blankly.
"I mean, Master Jacob."
Jade still received nothing from the dull kid in front of her. Then she added,
The one with the snow lion."
That way." Henry pointed in one direction.
"Well, good boy. I'll give you some candy later."
Jade grabbed Julia and flew away. 2 8th-level masters disappeared before his eyes instantly. Henry stared at the direction they took off. He was in a great shock and sat straight down on the ground in disbelief. Episode 259, Purple Cloud Lightning Tribulation. Jade and Julia were looking for Jacob in the sky while Jacob was driving back to the university with Kathy.
"Are your wounds still hurting?"
Sitting in the passenger seat, Kathy asked Jacob softly.
"It's fine now."
Jacob drove the car calmly. The clothes he was wearing at the moment were all ripped apart and had bloodstains all over, but the determined look on his face made him look reliant and strong. Kathy was going to ask him more about his relationship with Sophie, but she held it off after a second thought. The car traveled on the road quickly, and they were back on campus soon. After dropping Kathy at the front of the class, Jacob started the car again. "I'm going to get changed. The ones I'm wearing now look terrible."
"Okay."
Kathy nodded. She felt a bit relieved after seeing that Jacob was totally fine. Jacob drove off slowly. After he saw Kathy enter the building through the rearview mirror, he turned back immediately and drove to the administration building. After parking the car downstairs, Jacob raced into the building and rushed to the stairs. Jacob entered Susan's office by bumping the door open. After closing the door, Jacob clenched his teeth as he couldn't take it anymore. He jumped on the couch and his entire body twisted. It was a requirement to experience the pain that results from the transformation of the body when advancing from the 2nd level to the 3rd level. He looked like he was driving calmly earlier, but he was actually clenching his teeth and trying to overcome the painful struggle. The extreme pain had already started when he was giving Henry a lesson. He pretended to be calm only because he didn't want to expose his weakness to Henry. Now, sweats were dripping down Jacob's forehead. On the way back, he stayed silent while driving. It seemed like he was deep in thought, or trying to suppress his anger. But the fact was that he almost fainted because of the sharp pain. He didn't want Kathy to worry about him. Therefore, he tried to refrain from showing her anything abnormal. Some elixirs that could eliminate the pain were in Susan's drawer. However, Jacob didn't want to take them, even though he was suffering extreme pain. The greater the pain he overcame, the brighter the future he could have. The realm he could reach now would be limited if he relied on elixirs. Lumps of clouds gathered in the sky above the administration building. He had to put up with the extreme pain that would thoroughly remold him to advance in the realm, and he had to go through a lightning tribulation because of the elevation in Sword Shadow Scroll's level. Earlier, he used to have Susan's protection, but he could only rely on himself at the moment. Purple Cloud Lightning Tribulation. A needle-thin dash of lightning split the array formation that was set up in Susan's office and stabbed directly at Jacob's heart. The immeasurably powerful energy instantly filled Jacob's body. The Sword Shadow Scroll immediately started to eliminate the lightning power that kept getting more powerful and was dashing around Jacob's body. Jacob's meridians would burst whenever the lightning went through. Half of the 8 extraordinary meridians were damaged. Meanwhile, the recreation of the meridians wasn't completed yet. Jacob had to endure the tribulation for human cultivators and the tribulation for dragon cultivators. The metallic taste of blood gushed to his throat, but Jacob forced it back down. There would be a lightning tribulation every time the Sword Shadow Scroll went up in level, and the power of the lightning tribulation would get stronger each time. Jacob needed to have a complete concentration while he was going through this. Otherwise, he could lose all of his cultivation strength and die. The needle-thin purple lightning pierced into Jacob's body continuously. He felt like every acupoint on his body was going to explode. Jacob felt like the full power of Life-Death Note was probably similar to this. The 108 main acupoints in his body couldn't bear it anymore and finally exploded. At this moment, all the clouds in the sky disappeared in a flash. Half an hour later, Jacob slowly woke up and saw his clothes completely torn apart. The couch he was lying on turned black and burned as well. Jacob was quite terrified after going through that. It was indeed dangerous to go through a lightning tribulation without anyone else watching over you. The dragon core was as smooth as before. All the 40 openings on the dragon core had been smoothly polished. Although the acupoints and meridians in his body were still quite numb, they were slowly recovering. If Jacob had been a regular guy before, he could be called a talented cultivator now. The experience of thoroughly remolding himself was extremely painful, but his body composition and quality improved spectacularly. Ryan and the others might not be able to tell the difference since they were with Jacob almost every day, but any of his old classmates from high school would be surprised to find that Jacob had turned from average to outstandingly handsome. Even his gestures and expressions followed the natural laws. Jacob exhaled. He almost dropped his phone on the floor after realizing how spent he was. He picked up the phone and saw a message from Kathy, asking when he would attend the class. Jacob thought for a while and replied that he had changed and would be back in class soon. He couldn't go out like this, so he called Jade and asked her to bring him some clothes. Jade and Julia felt anxious as they could not trace Jacob. They didn't realize that they could have used their phones until Jacob called them. Jade shook her head. Although they bought cell phones, they never remembered to use them. The sisters arrived at Susan's office shortly with a set of clothes. Seeing Jacob in some burned clothes, they were shocked.
"What happened to you, Master?"
Jacob gave them a bitter smile. I'm at the 3rd level now." They paused for a second, out of surprise, and then their expressions turned joyful.
"Congratulations, Master."
"I'm lucky that I got the 40th opening." Jacob looked at them and took over the clothes, asking them to leave the room. Jade and Julia walked out of the office while holding hands and waited for him outside. Jacob walked out in his new outfit. He looked extraordinarily handsome except for his messy hair. He was gentle, yet had power, and he was calm as well as fierce. If it were on 5th heaven, a cultivator at the core formation realm like him would be called a master and be respected by the cultivators in the sect.
"So, the reason that you looked for us was to have us watch over you? I'm sorry we were late."
Biting her lower lip, Julia apologized. Jacob didn't want to talk more about what happened in the valley, so he shook his head and said, "No worries. It was scary, but not dangerous. Everything's fine." He looked back at the burned couch in Susan's office and winced while saying, "I guess I have to get Susan a new couch now."
"Leave that to us,"
Jade and Julia said joyfully. The stronger Jacob got, the happier they became. They knew many interesting places in the mortal world. Unfortunately, Jacob wasn't able to explore them with his current strength. Jacob realized that it was too late for him to return to the dorm for books. He went directly to the class. The class was already half over when he got to the classroom. It was a course in a small classroom which only had one door in the front.
"Sir, sorry I'm late."
Jacob stood in the doorway with empty hands. "It's fine. Come in." Professor David was notorious for his strictness among the students, but he was mild with Jacob. Ryan and the guys sitting in the back row gasped. They dared not skip any of Professor David's classes, but Jacob? When Jacob trotted to the back row of the classroom, Kathy, who was sitting in the front row, noticed that he was wearing new clothes when he passed by. She smiled at him, and Jacob smiled back and gave her a little wave. In the back row of the classroom, Sam scooted over and pulled Jacob to his side.
"According to our reliable sources, you and Kathy were both absent last night. Did you spend the night out with her?"
Sam asked Jacob with arched eyebrows. "You are more impressive, captain of the basketball team. I rarely see you nowadays." Jacob tried to change the subject. Professor David coughed loudly in the front of the classroom. Realizing that his voice was too loud, Jacob immediately shut up. He found his voice got more resonant after breaking through to the 3rd level. Episode 260. Is a war brewing? Kathy turned and looked at Jacob with a faint smile. Jacob smiled back. Now that they shared the same secrets, they felt closer than before. Although Sam didn't know what they were smiling about, he was envious. As the captain of the basketball team, many girls came to watch him play each day, but none of them was nearly as beautiful as Kathy. After the class, Sam and the others left without dragging Jacob to play online games, as he refused. After knowing Jacob's secrets, Kathy was no longer worried about him. Their relationship returned to normal. She went to the library with her friend to finish some assignments. Meanwhile, Jacob had his own business to tend to. First, he ran to the place behind the library and took out Snowflake, which attracted a group of girls who fed it. Then, he went to Susan's office to cultivate quietly, trying his best to absorb the 5 elemental essences from nature. He knew that he should never slack in cultivation. Although the Dragon Core could absorb nature essence by itself, the cultivation progress would be slow if he didn't work hard at it. The incident with Reggie showed him that despite all the rules and restrictions, strength spoke the loudest in the world of cultivation. If a high-level cultivator broke the rules and made a move against a low-level cultivator, the latter would have absolutely no power to defend himself or herself. After cultivating through the 2-hour lunch break, Jacob returned to class in the afternoon. Then, he went to Sophie's home to tutor her. It was evening, and the campus was full of boisterous crowds. Not wanting to attract attention, Jacob left his car at the administration building and took a bus to Sophie's home. Sophie had gotten home a couple of hours back from school, and Helen was cooking dinner while Dracon was looking through some files in the study.
Hello?
Jacob opened the door and entered the living room.
Hello, Jacob.
Helen walked out of the kitchen with a plate of vegetables in her hand.
It has been a while since the last tutoring session.
Jacob lifted the tutoring materials in his hand, which took him the entire afternoon to make.
It's okay, Jacob. You've been busy lately.
Helen looked at him with a smile.
Yeah, he's busy in love.
Sophie, who was watching TV on the sofa, said without looking up.
Really? In love with who?
Helen asked curiously. Sophie remained silent. Helen didn't pursue the topic. She smiled at Jacob and said,
I'll go get the food. You two should go to the dining room.
She then turned in the direction of the study room and called,
Dracon, time for dinner.
Dracon rubbed his head and stood up. As he walked into the living room, he nodded at Jacob. He looked preoccupied with troubles on his mind. The four of them sat by the table, which was full of delicious-looking dishes, reminding Jacob of the old days when he came here every day for dinner.
I called your grandma today to invite her to our house, but she insisted on staying in your house,
Helen said, while placing the plates and spoons before each of them. It's okay. Grandma will be fine since Uncle James will come to the house to take care of her. Jacob smiled at her gratefully. Oh, how are things going in the Dragon Palace?
The elders are still recovering. Elder Kayla is taking care of Susan, and Kenneth is still traveling. Everything is peaceful for the time being,
Helen said. Great. Jacob nodded. Today, Henry and I...
We know already.
Helen interrupted Jacob.
Henry?
Sophie got curious.
Some trivial stuff. Eat your dinner.
Helen placed a spoon before Sophie with force. Dracon's face was grim. He didn't speak, seeming to have a lot of things on his mind.
By the way, I've talked to Elder Frank, and you can go to his martial arts school when you want to practice. It's not far from your campus, and you may go anytime you want,
Helen said.
Okay,
Jacob answered. He could practice the boxing technique in the small forest by the school, but he needed an open space to practice the sword array formations. With the conflicts between the North Atlantic and South Atlantic escalating, he must focus on increasing his strength as much as possible. However, to make his parents and Grandma happy, he couldn't give up his studies and must pass each exam as well. On top of that, he must squeeze some time out to tutor Sophie. From the looks of Helen and Dracon, they didn't want Sophie to be involved in the conflict. They hoped that she could live her life like an ordinary high school girl. After dinner, Helen urged Sophie to go to her room for the tutoring session. With the bag of tutoring materials in his hand, Jacob followed her up the stairs. He had prepared a lot of practice papers for her to make up for the lost time. After they had gone upstairs, Helen's calm and easy expression disappeared. She looked at Dracon with worry.
Is it very serious?
Henry lost 1 level of cultivation strength in the fight with Jacob, and he is now on the second level. With what I know about Grandmaster Hank, I'm sure he will use this excuse to come to us with a large group of masters from the South Atlantic. I've ordered Elder Frank to stay alert and have guards all over the city," Dracon said with a sigh. Meanwhile, inside Sophie's room, "Okay, let's start," Jacob said as soon as he settled onto her desk. They both settled into their old routine of studying every subject one by one. Sophie was still mad at him for the whole Kathy situation, but she, as usual, forgot all about it when they were sitting together and talking like friends. After a couple of hours of studying, Jacob gave her a few math problems to solve. He looked over her other homework while she solved the problems. After a few minutes, Jacob looked up from her English homework as the room got too silent. There she was, sound asleep. Jacob couldn't say that he was mad or disappointed because he knew how overworked she had been for the past few days. He could see the tiredness in her stiff shoulders. After smiling at the way her mouth was open, resting on top of the sheet she was supposed to solve, Jacob picked her up with ease and set her down on the bed quietly. He tucked her in and went back to the table. He checked the sheet, which she had only managed to solve half of, circled out her mistakes, and wrote little notes of corrections in the corners. He then checked the time and decided he needed to get back to the dorm now, so he collected all his stuff and started heading out. He looked back and saw Sophie still soundly asleep in her bed. He stood up quietly before turning off the light and shutting the door behind him. Helen was checking an architectural design in the living room. Despite the threat from the South Atlantic, she didn't want to leave her work behind. When Jacob tiptoed down the stairs, Helen looked up.
"The tutoring session is over?"
"Yeah." Jacob nodded and walked into the living room.
"How was Soph today?"
Helen asked him. "Well, she worked hard today." Jacob covered for Sophie.
"I hope she studies hard and understands the hardships in life."
With a slight sigh, she looked at Jacob.
"I'll drive you back to college, okay?"
Jacob declined immediately. "No, thank you. I'll take the bus. Where's Soph's dad?"
"He went out to handle some emergencies."
Seeing the concerned look on Jacob's face, Helen continued,
"Don't worry, it's something related to his business."
Jacob nodded. Besides managing the Dragon Palace, Dracon had to manage the businesses on land. After all, the businesses on land were related to the activities of the cultivators of the North Atlantic. Also, Dracon and Helen were working hard to create a steady and peaceful environment for Sophie. When Helen walked Jacob to the door, something occurred to her.
"Oh, you have a spirit beast that is capable of flying, right?"
"Yeah." Jacob looked at her curiously, not knowing why she brought it up.
"Since that is the case, you can fly in the city on your spirit beast."
Helen looked at him.
"As long as you put a stealth energy sphere around you, ordinary people can't see you."
"But cultivators can't..." Jacob was about to raise a question when he suddenly realized that the dragon cultivators couldn't fly due to the supervision of the inspectors. Now, he was an inspector. Snowflake rolled out from Jacob's necklace. With a booming sound, it turned into its snow lion form with golden paws and white fur. Jacob put a reddish-pink energy shield around him and got onto Snowflake's back. It flew high in the air. Since Susan, the regional inspector of the region, was now recovering from her injuries in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, as Susan's assistant, Jacob was now the highest-ranking official among the cultivators in the city.